I'm quite used to having a bit of a mixed up body clock at the moment though, because I'm on like later shifts. So I've kind of adjusted to Dubai timings. But yeah, so I don't even know what time it is half the time. So my computer's still on UK time. So
how's it all going in Dubai? Because obviously last time we spoke, you were interviewing me. So
yeah, exactly.
And you were in Birmingham then. So since then, I've just been seeing you like living your best life on in Dubai. And you went at the best time because it's been pretty rubbish here.
yeah. I just I mean, I just heard that a second lockdown was on the horizon, and I just kind of had enough of the first one, to be honest. I did the first one at home in Birmingham and kind of just about got through it, but then when the second one was on the horizon, I'm not a good cold weather person at the best of times, and kind of the thought of being stuck in that flat for another indefinite period of time. And I just thought, I'm lucky in that I can just up and go, and my firm are kind of really accommodating in terms of, as long as the work's getting done, they don't really mind, how it's being done. So I'm really lucky that they just kind of were totally fine with me relocating. Our graduate recruitment manager actually was living in Spain in her second home at the time as well. So I wasn't the only one who up and left. But yeah, I just kind of felt it was a kind of a good mental health decision, really, because I was having real anxiety at the thought of being locked down in the cold for another X amount of months. So I just thought, I'm gonna go and see how it goes, and the rest is history. Here I am a couple of months later. Yeah, I've been here seven weeks now, I think. Yeah, so best decision.
I don't know about you. I mean, it just feel like you've been over there for ages, but
yeah.
What's the plan? Are you planning to continue doing that, or are you going to come back for Christmas? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I'm back for a couple of weeks over Christmas, and then I'm back out here again on the 30th for New Year. And then we'll probably stick out the winter here, I would have thought, for as long as I can. I mean, it's kind of subject to what goes on back at home, really, because I can only really be here for as long as our office is kind of closed and the court is still fully remote. Obviously, if I'm needed back in court, then I'm going to need to be physically present for that. So I'm going to need to come home for that. But you get quite a bit of notice normally for court hearings. So, and luckily the quarantine has been lifted now, which is great. So I can just come home and lead a normal life, because I was slightly concerned about having to do the quarantine. If I had to come home for something, I would have to come home 2 weeks before whatever it was I was going to have to do to see out the quarantine. But I'm not going to have to do that now, hopefully, as long as it stays on the safe corridor. So fingers crossed that it will. And then it's a lot easier to kind of come back and forth if I need to. But yeah, I imagine I'll be here for most of January and maybe February as well. And then, but totally dependent on kind of how things progress back home, really.
That's so interesting that your employer have been so supportive. Do you think if we hadn't got into lockdown and we hadn't have had all of this, you could have just said, "Can I go to Dubai for a few months?" Do you think that would have been a possibility? Oh, frozen. Oh, she's back. Is it your internet? Oh, there you are. You're back.
One side or the other. I can hear you. Okay, good.
You're back. You just froze for a minute.
Yeah. Sorry, can you just finish what you said? Because I didn't quite hear the end of what you said.
Of course, yeah. Right. So one of the things we've been discussing at Thrive is about flexible working. And when I set Thrive up, one of the core values was around remote working flexibility. And I think a lot of firms didn't really embrace that before. Do you think your employer, or just any employers, would have actually embraced it in this way? And like, if you'd have approached your manager like a year ago and said, "I'm off to Dubai for a couple of months," I mean, the reality is, probably would have been it wouldn't have even been considered, I don't think. I don't even think it would be on the table, would it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think realistically, it depends on whether you can actually kind of fulfill your job role by doing that. And I think when things were back to normal, obviously I wouldn't have been able to attend court. I wouldn't have been able to go see clients. I wouldn't have been able to attend physical meetings. And so that would have been kind of a hindrance really on me actually being able to fulfill what, my duties. So I think that probably would have been a no on that basis. But I think at the moment, obviously, because everything can be fulfilled remotely, that they're, you know, as long as I can do everything I'm needed to do, which I can do from any country really. I mean, I'm limited slightly by time constraints. I mean, here we're just 4 hours ahead, so actually it's doable, albeit I'm on a slightly later time zone. But I couldn't have gone to, like, you know, Australia or Thailand or something, because it would have been a nightmare. You know, I couldn't have done the hours. And I mean, even now they're pretty flexible about my hours, you know, in terms of if I want to finish a bit early, you know, if I want to do kind of more Dubai time, if I want to start a bit earlier, finish a bit earlier, then I can do that, as long as everyone knows kind of what times I'm working, so they're not trying to contact me, you know, in normal time and I'm not there. But very, very flexible, as long as I say what hours I'm going to be working, or if I want to swap, because here the weekend is Friday and Saturday rather than Saturday and Sunday. So yeah, so if I want to swap like a Friday and a Sunday, I can do that, as long as I let people know. And obviously, like, I'm not missing court or something like that, you know, then it's pretty flexible, as long as, you know, all the work's getting done, to be honest.
And that's the view I've always taken. I've always been like, well, if work's getting done, why do you need to work 9 to 5 in an office? I've always had that view, and I think it's taken a pandemic for some businesses to really embrace that. But I do think it's going to change moving forward, because, you know, employers are going to have that whole mindset now of, well, actually it did work. So, you know, when someone asks, oh, can I work from home this day, and they're like, oh no, actually you can't, those rejections are not going to be able to be as easily justified, I don't think, anymore. So,
yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also think kind of it opens up kind of the market for employability as well, in terms of where you can recruit from, because you no longer have to kind of recruit people who are necessarily geographically close. And I think, I mean, who's to say that you can't recruit people who are working in different countries, you know, with different skill sets, who have trained in different ways. You know, there are so many jobs that can be done remotely now, that it opens up kind of the pool of people to recruit from so much, which I think is going to be quite interesting, actually. I mean, I don't know how many firms will kind of embrace that opportunity and start maybe recruiting people who are, you know, from different backgrounds, from different countries, to do certain jobs. But there's no reason why we shouldn't, really. I mean, you know, it just kind of, and it, you know, it's going to kind of change the whole sort of regional firm, I think, because actually, you know, people don't have to be from the regions anymore. You know, you can get people living wherever and working remotely.
yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting to see how that changes, actually.
I agree with you, and I think we've seen it as well. I mean, I'm recruiting. In fact, I've just appointed a partner, and they live in Exeter, and I could never have got a partner from a top 100 firm from the south to work for Thrive, because we don't have an office, or we have a small office in London. But, you know, to be able to get a very London-based solicitor who's very senior to come and work for us, I mean, if we didn't have that model, it just wouldn't have worked. You know, you like you say, you're limited geographically. So I think it's really helpful for students to think about that as well, in terms of applying for things like work experience, because obviously they're not geographically you know, exposed to simply just the firms that are near them, and actually could be easier to potentially get some work experience if there is anything online. What have you been seeing recently? I mean, for us, we've been taking work experience on remotely. We've carried on as normal, but, you know, in all the mentoring stuff that you do, what are your thoughts on kind of remote work experience, and just getting work experience generally at the moment? It's just hard.
Yeah, it's so much harder at the moment, I think, because a lot of firms, I mean, a lot of the bigger firms generally only offer the kind of vacation scheme, formal placement anyway. Some of those have been converted to remote schemes, some haven't. Some have just decided to postpone it or recruit in other ways and not done a virtual back scheme type thing. But those firms who kind of would normally take on maybe ad hoc work experience, like on occasion we would have some ad hoc work experience, but it wasn't very common. But we would take those people on the basis of kind of shadowing, and actually those people wouldn't have access to our systems. You know, we'd ask them they'd have access to Word and things like that and files, but they wouldn't actually have access to the systems. And so that therefore makes it incredibly difficult to then do that remotely, because they were basically just shadowing us, but they can't shadow us because we're not there, and we can't give them access to the systems for, like, you know, data protection reasons. And so it became impossible for us to do it that way. And I think a lot of smaller firms probably have done the same thing as well, in terms of just, well, they previously had shadowing, but there's no sort of real equivalent of shadowing unless you set up a specific kind of virtual environment for that. And that's just not top of the list for a lot of firms to be setting up, you know, virtual work experience opportunities. I've seen a lot with what was Inside Sherpa. It's now called Forage. I think it's changed hands or changed names. And a lot of the bigger firms doing virtual internships, I think White and Case, Pinsent Masons, Clifford Chance, they've all got virtual internships, which are really good, actually. I haven't done one myself, but I know people who have been through the process and said they're really helpful, actually, which is kind of like a day in the life of it's mainly the corporate and commercial firms, but doing various different tasks that you would do in that firm, basically. And it counts to one. They're like 6-7 hours long. They're really intense days if you spend a day at the firm, basically. And a lot of firms are taking that as work experience in place of physical work experience. So I've been encouraging everybody to do those, really just to have something on your CV, because it still counts, albeit it's not exactly the same. But in the current climate, people understand that it's really, really difficult to get your kind of physical work placements, and that's kind of the next best thing. And it helps to get an understanding of what that firm's like as well, to kind of help you if you are thinking about applying for training contracts and where you might ultimately want to work. Then doing a virtual VAC scheme or a virtual internship is better than nothing at all. So I definitely encourage people to do those. And for the most part of those, I think they're all free, obviously. And I think a lot of them don't have any selection criteria. I think you can just apply and do it. A couple of them might, but I'm sure quite a few of them, they don't have any criteria. Anyone can do one. So in the absence of anything else, I would definitely do those. But you're right, it's so much more difficult because there's just zero shadowing, which is what so many people would do as kind of their first few stages of work experience. But obviously, how have you been doing your remote work experience? How have you set it up? What sort of tasks have you been kind of allocating, and how's it worked?
So we had two different styles. So the first was we partner with the university. So if anyone's still at uni, check with your university if they're partnered with a firm. Because what we do is every year we offer, instead of the student doing a dissertation, they do 1 day a week in firm. And obviously we went into lockdown during that placement period. So what we agreed to do was keep that going through. It was helpful because they obviously already knew us, but we were able to keep that going through lockdown. But because they'd already been doing it for 3 months, so they kind of knew the systems, they had their own email. So actually for them, that was really valuable, and they helped out on our free coronavirus helpline. So they were like doing advices, obviously sending them to us, but they were actually involved in like day-to-day stuff. The other side of it was actually really helpful with all of the updates. They were doing all the research for us and helping us with the coronavirus updates around furlough, around all of the restrictions and the changes that were all coming in. So all of that was really helpful because it's so time consuming when you get all of the new updates in, and sometimes you get them on a Friday night and it's literally just all hands on deck. So that was really, really helpful. And in fact, all of those have gone on to get jobs now, which is really good. So I'm really proud of them all. And then the next batch of people we've just taken on, they're doing 1 day a week, but we've literally onboarded them remotely. And slightly more challenging because they don't already know us. So what we've tried to do is make sure we've got team meetings or marketing meetings on those days, just talking through cases and just generally getting them involved. But a lot of what they're doing is really helping us with blogs and research. So there's still stuff people can do. It's effectively the non-chargeable paralegal work, what they're doing. So they're still getting that experience. And actually, like you said, it's better to do something than nothing. And being able to do it remotely, I think, is a skill, because a lot of juniors will never have worked remotely. So to show you're able to have that discipline to work by yourself and to approach a firm and do it all remotely, it takes a lot. And I think employers will really find that attractive.
Definitely. I think any kind of practice in this remote environment, and it'll also help you if you do go on to kind of secure a training contract and we're still kind of in this environment, which actually might well be the case, not necessarily due to the pandemic, but because a lot of offices and firms have actually chosen to kind of make this a more permanent style of working. I know a lot of firms have closed a lot of their regional offices permanently because they've realised that they can work in this way and it's a lot more cost effective to not have those premises. So actually there's a strong chance that even post-pandemic, you'll be doing a lot of your training remotely if you're working in certain firms. So building up that skill now is definitely really helpful, because you're right, it definitely is a skill. I can't even imagine what my training contract remotely would have been like, because all I remember is just constantly asking the person next to me questions all day long. And so kind of learning to kind of learn and develop without having that surrounding is definitely something that's a good skill to learn now rather than on day one of your training contract where you've got a million other things going on as well.
Exactly. No, and I think that's a really good point about trainees, because what we've seen, online, and so many people asking me questions about, well, what happens now, because I don't see my training supervisor all the time, and those people in that situation where they're already training, some people are finding that incredibly difficult, and mainly because of that osmosis that you get in the office. You're just not getting that anymore. Those little questions that you kind of think, oh, I'm probably not going to ring a partner to ask them that because they'll think I'm stupid. And we're finding that a lot with students and obviously trainees, where they're just like, I don't know what to do. So, building that resilience up and actually understanding how to communicate in a remote setting is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely is a skill. And I think it's sort of strange because when this first came about, I remember having lots of conversations about, if, distance learning and how people were kind of going to develop their people skills, and was it going to be the same thing as kind of interacting in an office? Are you going to kind of lose that period where you develop that if you're kind of learning, or if you're doing university online rather than with people? And then now it's kind of like, well, it's sort of shifted towards, okay, well, now you need to develop this skill of remote working because this is actually here to stay, rather than it just being kind of a temporary thing, which potentially some people are going to miss out on. It's now like, well actually, no, we need to develop this and we need to train this, because this is going to go on to be more and more the norm, actually. I think regardless of the pandemic, it's proved that we can work this way, and for many businesses it's a much more cost-effective way of working. So it is going to be here to stay, I think, in maybe slightly less capacity than it is now, but certainly a lot more than it was pre-pandemic.
Definitely. And so we're talking about qualities then. So obviously things like the ability to think on your feet, and all of the home working side of it is really important. But what are the key qualities, if you had to pick 3 key qualities of a lawyer, what would you say?
These every time I get asked this question, I think I give a slightly different answer, and this used to trouble me a little bit in terms of thinking about, why do I give different answers every time? So I not know what I'm talking about, or and I think it's because each time I'm probably thinking of a slightly different type of lawyer in a slightly different type of setting. And I do think your skill set has to vary to a certain extent depending on what arena and environment you intend to work. The skills of a criminal legal aid lawyer are very different to the skills that are required of a kind of corporate commercial solicitor working for a Magic Circle firm. I mean, I think that you do need different qualities. There are some, I think, that are intrinsic, which are probably the ones that I would say you need regardless. And I think people skills definitely is the main one which springs to mind, because I think in whatever capacity you are giving legal advice, you are always going to have to be giving that to a human. It's still a human to human business law, and it's always going to be. I mean, there's a lot of hype about robots taking over and this and that, but I'm not a believer that will happen. I think technology is great, and I'm glad that technology is improving to help us to do our jobs more efficiently and in a better way, but I don't think that it will ever be robots kind of delivering the face-to-face legal advice. I know we've got chatbots to kind of give little bits of advice here and there, but I think real lawyer client legal advice is always going to be given from a lawyer to their client. And I think having people skills and the ability to communicate that is incredibly important, because you can be the best lawyer in the world, but actually if you can't communicate the advice well and in a way that appeals to your client, then it's no good. You're not going anywhere fast, really, if you can't actually make that connection with your client, especially in the current climate when there's so much competition. It's very easy for a client just to go elsewhere if you can't actually build that human connection with them. And you're dealing with important issues when you're dealing with legal advice. It's somebody's a very personal problem, or it's something about their business which they feel very passionately about, and it's really important that they feel a connection with you as their lawyer.
It's that trust as well, isn't it? I think when you've got the people skills, it's the communication piece, but it's building that rapport and the trust over time. And it's bigger than simply being a people person. It's that, like you say, it's that that trust element, and that they feel they can continue to come back to you for that advice, and keeping that, and building that client base. That's so important. And at the junior end, people probably don't think about that as much because they're just trying to get everything right and they're learning so much. But actually, fine-tuning that skill early on is really important.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, and I think the age-old phrase of commercial awareness, I think, is really important. But I think that can be really widely interpreted. I mean, I think how I look at it is, an understanding of the world in which you operate, in which your business operates, and equally the world in which your client operates and their business operates, if you're advising on a business matter, or if not, what their personal struggles are, what their goals are, and what the problem is that they need solving. And actually, I think that can be interpreted as commercial awareness. Even if you're dealing with a personal issue, you still need a wider understanding of the implications of your advice and what they need, and what their particular situation is. And I think that all falls under commercial awareness, even if it's not strictly commercial. If you're advising on a private client issue or a criminal issue, it's still understanding kind of greater context of the advice that you're giving, rather than just kind of from you to the client. It has wider consequences. So I think that is also really important, because again, you're not going to be able to give valuable advice, and you're not going to be able to operate profitably as a solicitor unless you understand how to actually make money from the services that you're providing. So you've got to understand your environment as well. So again, having that commercial awareness is really important, and understanding how you can actually, be successful as a lawyer over and above just giving the black letter legal advice, if that makes sense. And I think,
everybody's got, everyone that becomes a lawyer has a degree. Everyone's intelligent. There's a basic kind of, everyone's been to university, and it's kind of that bit more, isn't it? And it's how do you stand yourself apart from other people? Because like you say, most people will have already had work experience. They might have done a back scheme, and actually being able to show some of these key qualities and applications for either training contracts, jobs, or even just work experience is attractive to law firm owners. It's attractive to me as a firm owner, because commercial awareness, so many people don't understand what that means when I ask them, and that is really shocking, because I'm like, I mean, it's something that I was taught very, very young, when I was very young in my career. But, coming into the profession, I don't think you get taught it as much in certain law schools. And I think it's definitely to fine tune and actually understand what that means to you, and what skills you've already got that can show commercial awareness.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think it's just a bit of a nebulous term as well, because so many people say, oh, well, I don't need that because I'm not going into commercial law. And it's kind of seen as like, oh, well, I can't talk about, they won't ask me about commercial awareness because I'm going for a job in private client. And it's like, no, you still need to know, because you still need to understand that you are working in a business. Even if you're giving a client advice about a personal matter, you are still doing that in the capacity of working as a lawyer in a business. And also that client may well need advice. Even though I'm a personal injury lawyer, I still need to be able to give advice, in the context of a client's job, potentially in terms of how it's going to affect their business, how it's going to affect their income. I still have to quantify their loss of earnings based on how much they earn in their job. And there's a lot of commercial factors which come into even giving private client advice. So it's not just kind of I'm not doing commercial, so I don't need to know about commercial awareness. I think I get, that comes up time and time again. Or how do I demonstrate commercial awareness in the context of, a private client application? And again, it just comes back to understanding the firm and understanding the market that the firm operates in, and who their competitors are, what their kind of exposure is and what their risks are, and, really what their overall goals are. And I think just having an understanding of that is commercial awareness, really. It doesn't have to be in the kind of corporate and commercial context.
Yeah, that's right. And, with I mean, obviously we represent employers and employees, so there's a commercial angle, obviously, with the more corporate stuff. But with the individuals, they still want to know if they're being made, if they've got an offer on the table, they want to know, well, if I don't take it, what's going to happen? How much is it going to cost me to go to tribunal? What will I get if I go to tribunal? What will I get if I get a new job? So that commerciality around accepting that offer, it might not be as the value of the claim, but you have to understand commercially what it would cost the client to proceed. And it's that side of it as well that people often forget. And I think that's really important, because the individual or the business will always want to know, well, what am I going to get net? And that's what they always want to understand is, well, what's it going to cost me to get to that point? And then being able to balance that is so, so important. So a final question from me, and then I'm going to open it up to the questions that we've had in from email and also on the chat. So if anyone's got any questions on the chat, just pop them in. My final question, Chrissy, is about the SQE. what is going on with the SQE, because I teach at Leeds Beckett and we're still undecided about what's happening. I've got a little bit of experience with it, but you seem to be the absolute queen when it comes to the SQE and all the new rules. What are you understanding at the moment is the position, and have you got any tips for people? Oh, I think we've lost Chrissy. She's coming back.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
You're there. You
did lose me briefly. You did.
Yeah, I was just asking you about the SQE. What obviously it's taken like the legal community by storm, because it's a massive upheaval of the way that we conduct the exams for law graduates. Obviously going into instead of training contracts. What are your views on it, and have you got any tips for people if they're considering doing LPC or SQE? Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, you know, this is a whole day-long conversation in itself. I mean, I think I have quite mixed feelings about the SQE. I think primarily I am pro the SQE because I think the system needed changing. I think the training contract process was really outdated, and it was really restrictive and bad for diversity, and it wasn't always getting the right people through the process. You know, there are a lot of great people, potentially great lawyers, who were slipping through the net because of the training contract process just not being that kind of, you know, it just doesn't suit a lot of people, you know, in the way that it works and the way that law firms recruits. And so I agree that it needed changing and it needed opening up to allow more people to come through the process by different means. So I'm glad that the system has changed. It doesn't fall solely on you now having to obtain a training contract, and students have got slightly more, or, you know, aspiring lawyers have got more control over the qualification process, because effectively they just have to do their 2 years of qualifying work experience, which doesn't have to be a training contract. It can be in any kind of legal role which fulfills the SRA criteria, which are pretty broad actually. So, you know, a paralegal role, or there are other different types of work experience, you know, advising at the CAB clinic, you know, legal assistant. There are lots of different roles which will fit within qualifying work experience. They just have to match with the criteria, and a solicitor just has to sign you off to say that what you've done fits the SRA criteria effectively. So it doesn't have to be a training contract. So anything, you know, 2 years of experience which fits that description. And then you have to pass your SQE1 and SQE2 exams, which SQE1 is a multiple choice exam, best answer. So you'll get given a question with 5 possible answers, all of which could be correct, but you have to pick the best one. And that is quite a rigorous exam. It's something like 180 questions spread over. It's a 2-day exam. It's pretty intense. It's a pretty intense, and that tests your kind of functional legal knowledge. And then SQE2 is a little bit more like the LPC, actually, in terms of it tests your practical skills, like, you know, interviewing and you know, advocacy and all of that kinds of thing, and drafting. That's kind of what your SQE2 is about. But the really interesting thing is that they've taken away the necessity for you to actually have studied any academic law. So you now don't need an undergraduate law degree or a law conversion. You can actually go in and sit your SQE1. You need a degree of some kind, but it doesn't have to be in law. So you can now go and sit your SQE1, SQE2 exams, do 2 years of qualifying work experience, and become a lawyer having never done a law degree or a GDL, which I find which is like a massive change from the current situation. So that's kind of one major change. And I suppose what they've done here is they've kind of taken the focus off of the training contract and put it more onto the exams. And the reason they've done that is to kind of standardize the process, because there was some concern that people were qualifying by different means. The standard of training was different everywhere. So the idea of introducing the exam is that everybody is a uniform standard if everybody has passed these exams, which I can sort of understand to an extent. But I think my feeling is, and this is probably some bias on my part because I'm not a great exam taker, you know, my academics are not, you know, my academics are very poor. And I fundamentally believe that law isn't really an academic career. It's more of a practical career, actually. And I think your training is far more important in terms of defining what kind of lawyer you're going to be than your grade on an exam or your ability to pass an exam. I still think exams are quite an outdated way of testing somebody's, you know, intelligence or performance. You know, there's no real correlation between how well people perform in exams and what great lawyers they go on to be. So I sort of disagree with placing now all of the focus on the exam and now saying that actually your training is less important, because now you can have any kind of legal role, even if it's just advising in the CAB, so your level of training doesn't really matter. All that really matters is that you pass these exams, and that dictates whether or not you can be a lawyer. And I don't feel as comfortable with that. I still feel like your training, it should be a very key part of whether you should qualify or not, and at what stage you qualify. It should really be a matter of, are you practically ready, rather than does an exam say that you're ready, because that's kind of how I feel about it. So I have very mixed feelings about it, but I'm pro the system changing, but I still have kind of some reservations about having changed it in this way.
And so obviously there's two different types of exams. Obviously at the moment, I mean, I teach on the LPC, so I know exactly, I only teach one module, but it is very practical. There is a lot of reading and there's a lot of law to learn. If you didn't do a degree and you don't have the LPC and you just sit the SQE, I don't think you could pass it, could you?
No, I mean, there are, so in place of the GDL/law degree, there are prep courses that go along with the SQE, but they're not mandatory. But realistically, if you've not done a law degree or a GDL, then you'd be foolish to sit your SQE1 without doing a prep course. So there are prep courses provided by Barbary is the main one, but also ULaw and BPP provide those prep courses, which you would certainly have to do if you'd not done any law previously. And they're probably advisable to do even if you have done some law previously, because they actually prep you for the exam, which is kind of a skill in itself. Even if you know all of the legal knowledge and everything like that from your degree, you actually need some prep for how to take that exam. And the prep courses will help you with that. So generally they advise doing the prep course, even if you have got previous legal knowledge. But the process is a lot cheaper than the LPC still, even with a prep course. And that's one of the, it's kind of one of the accessibility points, is that this process makes it a lot cheaper to qualify than it does under the current system, which is always a plus point. It's going to make it more accessible if the cost is lower. But I think you've got to balance that with making sure you're still getting people through who are of an appropriate standard to practice. And I think my concern is, are you going to know that from an exam?
I don't think so. I'm very anti-exams. I mean, partly because I trained as a barrister, and the exams are very, very practical at the bar. I mean, you do have the multiple questions, but your exam is being video doing advocacy, and so I think I just feel it's such a skills-based job, and that practicality and that application is so important. I just don't think you can get all of that from an exam. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. What do you think? So in terms of the two different types, so you've got the SQE1 and the SQE2. How close can you take them together, and what prep courses for both?
Yep, so there are prep courses for both. So the first sitting of SQE1 will be in November 2021. And the first sitting of SQE2 will be in April, I think it's April 2022. So you can take them pretty close together if you've already done, and another key factor is if you can have already done your 2 years qualifying work experience. So you don't have to wait and start your 2 years qualifying work experience post 2021. If you've already done 2 years as a paralegal, for example, you could just take your SQE1 in November and take your SQE2 in April and be qualified by, summer 2022 in theory. But again, you'd probably want to do a prep course, at least for SQE1, even if you've done a law degree. But you'd be able to do that. I think the first prep courses, launch in January or February with Barbary. So you could feasibly do that and be ready to take your SQE1 in September. So particularly for those people, those paralegals who've been paralegaling forever and just slip through the training contract net, which is a lot of people I know, particularly at my firm, who have gone for the internal training contract time and time again and not got it. And actually now they're in a position where they could just qualify now. They don't need that training contract anymore. They can just take that exam in September, take the next one in November, take the next one in April, and they're qualified. So I think there will be quite a lot of people in that position who will probably be like the first SQE cohort almost, probably those people who've been, you know, ready to qualify for a long time, but just haven't got the illustrious training contract. So I think it'll be interesting to see how, you know, that kind of first generation go through the exam process, because there's been a lot of pilots and, you know, it's been through a lot of testing process, the SQE. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how, you know, how many people pass and, you know, what the kind of pass rates are like. And ultimately time, you know, it's going to be a case of time telling whether it produces the same level of lawyer as the current process. And I think that's something that you're only going to learn really from time. You know, we're just going to have to wait and see with that process.
Yeah, because I know with the LPC, it's very much geared, the whole course is geared up to passing the exam. So again, you know, you obviously you do have your practical skills that you learn, but equally you learn it so that you get through the exam. And that's really how all the courses are set up, is to really help you. So I think the first few rounds of people will probably, you know, well, they are guinea pigs effectively, because they're the ones that are going to trial it out and for real, you know, they've been those test runs. But the reality is, until we've got a few cohorts under the belt of the SQE, we won't really know the effectiveness and really how hard or easy it is. I mean, I'm going to make a guess that it's going to be pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it sounds like my worst nightmare, to be honest. I would have rather done the LPC, you know, open book, and you could, you know, writing essays. I mean, I don't love any type of exam, but I'd probably lean towards that one rather than doing the SQE, just because you've got something like, you've got like less than a minute to answer each of these questions. And I don't really operate very well in that environment where you're given like a scenario that's going to be a paragraph like this. You've got 5 questions to answer. You've got to pick the best one, and you've got to do that. And it works out as less than a minute per question. You know, that would be my worst nightmare, you know.
It's just stressful though, isn't it? I mean, I've got anxiety, and that type of thing would just be like, I find that really overwhelming. I'm just like, ugh.
Well, so would I. And I think that's sort of one of the reasons why I'm a bit in two minds about it, because I also think that that's not really representative of any real life legal situation. I mean, we're now in a day and age where you never don't have a phone or an internet connection or a book you can look at. Yeah, exactly. So it just seems a bizarre way of testing how good a lawyer you're going to be, to put you in a situation which you just never find yourself in as a lawyer, not these days anyway, maybe once before. And that's why I'm a bit like, well, why are we testing people in these, in this situation? Because that just doesn't happen really, not, very often anyway. I mean, I can't think of a situation where I've ever had to make a decision like that in under a minute, and then had to then make, 180 more in the next,
well, you just don't. And actually you're encouraged to think about it as well, because at the end of the day, whatever your advice is, someone's going to rely on that to make a decision. So in reality,
that would be negligent to do that, really.
So it kind of defeats the object of of everything that you learn when you do the LPC, which is the whole, it's about ask the right questions, then go away, then do the advice, because you don't always have the answers straight away, because you don't always have all the right information. So making people make those really quick, definite decisions, I don't know, it kind of goes against how I was taught anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I think experience tells you that often kind of your gut reaction first is not always the right one. Because you might have misread something, or you don't have all the information, like you said. So I'm not sure it's kind of the best way of testing whether, these aspiring lawyers have the capability and qualities required to go on and, be good lawyers, by testing them in that kind of environment. So I've got mixed feelings. I like the fact that it's changed. I like the fact that it's opened out the market, the fact that you can now train. You don't have to train. It's opened it out so that you can now do your qualifying work experience outside of a law firm, because historically, then it was mainly law firms that could offer training contracts. There was limited opportunity to train elsewhere other than in private practice. And I like the fact that you can now train anywhere pretty much, because the definition is so broad. Yeah. But, by that token, I don't like the fact that it's shifted the importance now pretty much down to an exam and completely away from the training experience. So swings and roundabouts. It was never going to be perfect.
Yeah, well, it was. and it's like you say, it'll probably evolve as time goes on. In terms of the qualifying experience then, so obviously before when we had a training contract, you did your 3 seats. Do you still have to have the 3 areas and some non-contentious, or can it all be in one area now?
Yeah, so it can all be in one area. So basically, I don't have the exact definition in front of me, but it's something like you have to have been in an environment which has allowed you to develop the skills of a competent solicitor or something. There's nothing about practice area, nothing about contentious or non-contentious. It doesn't even say you have to develop the skills. You just have to be in an environment which allows you to develop those skills, which kind of on the flip side puts me with my supervisor hat on in a difficult position, because I've been used to supervising trainees, and I would sign off a trainee only at the point where I was confident that they were competent, because that's the job of the training contract. You have to be confident that they have that level. And now when I'm looking at, potentially when I'm going to be looking at SQE, students coming through and aspiring lawyers, I have to kind of drop that and go, no, I'm not actually assessing whether or not they're competent. That's for the exam to do. All I have to do is tick off that they've been in this environment that's allowed them to develop the skills. So I've got to kind of lower my bar a bit and say, okay, I'm not measuring them to that standard anymore. I'm measuring them to effectively a much lower standard, because it's the job of the exam now to determine whether they're fit to qualify. But then, what happens if I genuinely think someone is not fit to be competent, but they have met the qualifying work experience standard, they've been allowed to develop these skills, but I don't feel that they are competent, but then they go and take the exam and they pass, I'd feel very uncomfortable about that.
I mean, it is a benefit for smaller firms like ours, because we only do employment law. So, one of the ways that we can now qualify our staff is obviously allowing them to take the SQE instead of doing the LPC, and they can continue to work.
Oh, and as a business, I think it's less of a worry, because as a business, you can train your your students to the standard that you want them, I think. And that's actually in some ways a benefit for you, because you don't have to kind of outsource them to go and do their contentious or non-contentious somewhere else. It's quite favorable, actually, I think, for businesses in some ways. But I'm more kind of worried about the kind of wider, almost sort of public interest here about the students who aren't going to train in, establishments like yours, who are going to go and train places who don't have that level of training, who perhaps haven't previously offered training contracts because they weren't regulated to do so, have no experience of training trainees, which is, entirely possible, because now, there are so many definitions of what will satisfy qualifying work experience that, you've got potentially people giving you next to no training, but can sign off the fact that you've had the opportunity to develop these skills. I mean, where does that end? Oh, you sat in a boardroom and you made tea while we were having a conversation about a partnership agreement. Has that allowed you to develop the skill? Does it matter that you haven't? It just becomes, it becomes very difficult, I think. But I know Mary Bonser as well at Flex. Yeah, so she's actually kind of designed this sort of like competency, almost like a form, that you can actually fill in to kind of track your qualifying work experience and check, from a point of view that you've actually met all of the competencies that you need to meet. So that's a really good way of kind of just for your own personal development, if you are somebody who's planning to take the SQE, just so that you can be confident that your training is good enough. You can use that to actually kind of map out your training and make sure you've recorded everything and what standard you're at as well. So I would recommend that anybody do that, just so that you've got a personal record of what you've done, and it makes it easier for someone to sign off what you've done as well. So I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, and I'm sure it will work out, because businesses who are training their trainees have got obviously an interest in making sure they train them to the best of their ability. So hopefully that will be enough incentive to make sure that the quality of the training is sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that we've approached it is we've actually taken someone on as an apprentice. They've actually got they've got a degree, but they don't have a law degree. So they're doing a legal apprenticeship, and at the end they'll do the SQE. So they have a level of training and support, because they've obviously got the apprenticeship with BPP, but then that's actually funded by us and the government. So it's actually almost a free way of doing it. It's a really, for anyone who's thinking, actually, I don't have the money, or I don't want to get a loan, it's obviously got to find a firm that will take you on an apprenticeship, and if you haven't got a law degree, it's 6 years, so it's quite a long time, but you're learning on the job. And obviously, I mean, from my experience, those people who learn on the job and actually are working while studying, it is hard, but wow, they become really good lawyers, because they're compounding all of that knowledge with practical skills. So, you know, and that doesn't have to be in an apprenticeship. It could be that you're a paralegal, like you say, and that you're actually doing the prep course alongside. Are they doing the prep courses part-time as well as full-time then?
Yes, so I think you can spread it over, I think, you know, like 10 weeks or 40 weeks, or there are various different timeframes that you can spread it over. With Barbary anyway, I don't know as much about the University of Law and BPP courses, but with Barbary, you've got a lot of different options for how you want to do the prep course. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think we've had a couple of questions come through about the SQE.
Yes, I've got a question here as well. So do you want to answer? We'll answer the shorter ones on here first. So, hi, ladies. Quite different, then, isn't it? The SQE from Rachel Bell. Would you say the training contract might not be as comprehensive? The training might not be as comprehensive as the LPC.
Yeah, so I think the thing about the SQE is the SQE is not a course, it's literally a set of exams. So yeah, the SQE is SQE1 and SQE2. There is option, whereas the LPC is a course with an exam at the end of it. So there isn't actually any part of the SQE which is training effectively. So there's no training component to the SQE, but there are optional prep courses that you can do to prepare you for it. So in that way, yes, it's kind of training versus no training. But I think if we're talking about, I suppose, the 2 years element, then yes, if you go down the LPC route, then you will have to combine that with a training contract in order to qualify. Well, there is an exemption, which means you don't necessarily have to. But if you go down the LPC route, you will be trying to get a training contract. So the LPC will be coupled with 2 years of training under the training contract regime, which is more stringent than the SQE route, which only has to be coupled with 2 years of qualifying work experience, which is effectively measured to a lower standard than a training contract. So there will potentially be a difference in training standard, but equally a lot of firms are opting to not really change their recruitment method so much, which is another interesting part of the SQE. You know, that's kind of another fundamental reason why it's, you know, why have you changed it in such a way that actually means that law firms don't have to change anything at all. So a lot of law firms will still be recruiting by means of a training contract. So even if you go down the SQE route with a major firm, you will still have to secure a training contract with that firm in order to qualify. Probably they may well end up, you know, supporting some paralegals through the SQE route, but mainly law firms are going to stick to their current recruitment practices. So it's not necessarily the case that you won't receive the same level as training, but if you opt to go down the SQE route kind of independently and do your work experience in various different places that are not with a major law firm, you may end up not getting as comprehensive a training experience as you would if you went down the traditional route. That's a really convoluted explanation.
No, it's right, there isn't. And you actually kind of think of these, you think of all these different options when you start to talk about it more as well. And I think, you know, there isn't one answer. That's the point. You know.
Yeah.
There's never been a simple route. And thanks, Rachel. She's saying, "Oh, you explained it. It's a little bit convoluted. It's fine." So Kira's asked, I'm a second year law student and I'm looking for to apply for a VAC scheme and training program. Do you have any advice for applying for these?
Yeah,
some top tips.
Yeah, top tips for applying for VAC schemes. I think the first tip is definitely to apply selectively in terms of do your research in terms of about the different firms and thinking really about where you want to apply, what type of law firm you want to work in, what type of law you want to practice. And I would advise probably applying to no more than 6 or 8, maybe maximum of 10. I would say even that's probably too many. 6 or 8 firms that you've done a lot of research on and you're really sure that those are places that you want to apply, and then make sure your applications are really tailored to those firms, specifically talking about why you want to work for that firm and not just kind of talking about why you want to work in commercial law generally or why you want to work for a city firm generally. It's really important that you talk about that firm, because I think when you're looking at these applications, I think one of the firm's main priority is, you know, we don't want this person to train with us and then us invest a lot of money in them and then just go work for our competitor 2 years later, or a year later. So it's really important that you speak specifically and talk specifically about why that firm in particular. So to do that, you have to do your research. So definitely research and make sure you narrow it down to the firms which are right for you. And then in terms of applications, I would definitely say tailoring. I would definitely try and make sure that you get as many key competencies into your application process as possible. So read the questions really carefully. make sure that you are really answering the question, because there are a lot of questions which are quite similar across a lot of different application forms, but they're not all identical. So make sure you're not copying and pasting and that you're answering the individual questions that are being answered. I see so many copy and paste jobs, and it's just, you know, freehand draft each of your responses, even if you've, you know, drafted one very similar to it before. Try and get your applications in early as well. If you possibly can, get them out of the way. Try not to leave them to the last minute. Also check anything else that you need to submit with your application form as well, like a cover letter. I've seen cover letters forgotten loads of times or missed off, and they're a really good opportunity to explain a little bit more about yourself and why you want to work for that firm. So make sure that you've included everything that you need to include. I could go on for days with tips. I have a whole YouTube channel dedicated to this, by the way. Yeah. So I'll give you a little plug, which is here somewhere. Here.
This side, yeah. Disappears into it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, loads and loads of other tips on there. But yeah, those are kind of the first ones that come to mind. Good luck as well.
I had a question in on email from someone called Danny. He said that he's had loads of rejections recently for work experience. He's trying to get qualifying work experience and practical employment as well. So in a law firm, whether that's a legal assistant or a paralegal, and he's got a degree and he's kind of hit a brick wall. What would you say in terms of tips for people? Best way to get an entry level job, where whether you've got a degree or not, I suppose, but that kind of low level, like you've got, everyone wants experience and you haven't got experience. What do you do?
Yeah, so I think 3 potential options. I think one is I think a lot of people look for some work experience. You're right, it's this old conundrum of you can't get work experience without work experience. You know, where do you start with it? Because everybody for work experience wants you to already had some. I think one option is to do the virtual internships we were talking about earlier, because actually that does count as work experience, and employers are very sympathetic in the current climate to if you haven't managed to get physical work experience. So if you've got some virtual work experience, at least that shows that you have some understanding of what goes on the inside of a law firm, which is often what people are concerned about. Employers are concerned about taking someone on who's literally not got any clue about what's going on. They're going to be a handful to manage, and you know, that's kind of what goes through an employer's mind. I think they're thinking about work experiences. Oh, is this person going to be kind of more hassle than they're worth sometimes? So I think showing that you've got some idea of what goes on inside a law firm, and you can do that by having done a virtual internship. So those are provided by Forage. So there are a few different law firms that are on there, and they're free to do, and there are pretty much no entry criteria. So step one, definitely do one of those just to get something on your CV. Another option is to go through Flex. We were talking about Mary Bonser earlier. So Flex Legal, is that what she's called now? I know she's just changed it. It was Flex On Demand. I think it's Flex Legal or something now. Yeah, so she basically is an organisation who matches aspiring lawyers with short-term paralegal options and opportunities, and these range from kind of a couple of days up to 6 months. They're all short-term experience, and they all require different levels of experience. So you might find something on there for someone who's got less experience. She has loads of different options. So try Flex. And the other option is to kind of start in a non-legal environment. I know that might not be what you want to do because you want to get straight stuck in there with the legal work experience. But actually, legal work experience is extremely difficult to get, like so much more difficult than any other role. And there are also a lot of transferable skills that you can take from literally any other job, you know, especially if you want to go into a commercial setting, then yes, a commercial, you know, working for a business is great. But actually anything that involves people skills, organization, time management, prioritizing, you know, which is any job. Sorry?
Commercial awareness.
Yeah, exactly. Then you can actually take a lot from that. So it might be a way around it to kind of start in a non-legal job and then work your way into a legal position. So there's a few different options there. Hopefully one of them will work for you.
Oh, no, thank you. We've got a couple more questions that we can squeeze in. So Denise says, hi, I'm a non-law graduate and I'm currently applying for a training contract and work experience. However, I did not have a positive experience. Not sure what to do next. What direction would be the best?
Currently applying for training contracts.
Well, I suppose it very much depends how much you want it. I've always thought this with law. You have to face rejection. I don't know anyone who just walks into a job. You know, you very much, I mean, when I trained at the bar, and I must have applied for hundreds of pupilages and been to so many interviews, and you have to learn from that experience, and you know, if where possible, ask for feedback. And I think it's really important to take that as a lesson and not as a rejection, because otherwise you just feel really demoralized. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by positive experience. I think if your experience was just that you got rejected, then that is a perfectly normal part of the process. You know, this happens to, you know, 99% of people will experience rejections. It would be very unusual that you'd go through the process and not get a single rejection. So don't be put off by that. And if your experience was that you just didn't have a great experience going through the training contract process with a particular firm, then maybe that just wasn't the right firm for you, because there are so many different firms and so many different types of business that if one really didn't appeal to you, you didn't get a good vibe from that one, that doesn't mean that the law isn't for you necessarily. It just means that that wasn't the right fit for you. And it might be worth kind of going back to the drawing board, doing a little bit more research, trying to get to know a little bit more about different firms, trying to go to events, you know, like this, or events with graduate recruitment who are doing webinars, and trying to actually find the firm that's the best fit for you before you go through the application process, because you're much more likely to be successful if you already know that that firm's likely to be a winner for you before you start the process. So, you know, I think, you know, do a little bit of analysis to see how you feel. And definitely it comes down to, you know, how passionate you are about it. But don't be put off by kind of one initial bad experience, because you're likely to have that in various different capacities, but that's not necessarily representative of how your career would be or how your entire experience of the process will be.
No, I really agree with that. And I think that, you know, when you're looking as well, look at the firm's values, try and follow them on social media, and just generally get a feel for those firms. Don't just go for the firms that everyone else is going for. If you've had a bad experience, why was it bad? And like you say, analyze that, really think about where you want to be and what kind of lawyer you want to be, because there are so many different types. And like you say, you know, if you want to be a commercial lawyer in a big bank, you know, big banking job or whatever, then great. But then some people actually really want to do the criminal side. So you need to kind of work out what you want to do. And you're not going to know that straight away. Sometimes you'll have to have a few jobs that actually you don't enjoy, but you need to not enjoy them to know that you didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So always a negative thing to have a negative experience.
Yeah, it can just help direct you in the right direction. Definitely. I think I agree with you. I think I saw your post the other day. It said, is it say it's not rejection, it's redirection? Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, the reality is that, you know, it's very much how you treat it. And it is hard being a trainee lawyer, or, you know, a law graduate, because there are less and less jobs available, and you are going to have some pretty negative experiences. But equally, once you find the right firm, it is a great career. So persevere. If you really want a career in law, then persevere, and hopefully find someone that fits your values.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you got time for 2 more quick questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I've got one on that came through Instagram. So yeah, we'll do these 2 as well.
Cool. So Rachel's asked, so she says she sees a lot of pressure on social media with regard to knowing people in the firm. How important is this in terms of selection? Ooh, knowing, I don't think it's important at all.
No, it's not. I mean, 90% of our trainees who get through the process, you know, I've never met before. I don't think anyone in the firm has ever met before. I think it can be a bonus point, you know, it can, if you happen to know someone in the firm. But I think there's I see a lot of name dropping for kind of the sake of name dropping with no follow through. I think name dropping can, you know, it can help you, but provided you actually, you know, put some explanation around that, like you met so-and-so at an event and this is what you gained from it. Like it really helped you, you know, decide that this was a firm for you because of this particular thing and this particular thing. But just kind of saying, I know X, Y, and Z, you know, are helpful. And it's not necessary. It's great, you know, if you do happen to know someone, like you said, you can actually make some sort of constructive comment about that person that you know, and how it makes you stand out. But, you know, I honestly, most people don't know people in the firm. It's great if you can do it, but it's not essential at all. Don't worry if you don't.
The processes in place are very much, obviously some firms will ask, do you know someone, but more from a conflict perspective. Actually, you know, the reality is that firms are trying to adopt a more objective selection process. So it's gone are the days where, or well, I like to think they are, gone are the days where your dad would ring up, someone's dad would ring up and say, okay, just give my daughter a job.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are still firms that do that, but the reality is that firms are trying to move away so that they're more inclusive in their selection process.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. I mean, I think it can, if you happen to make a particularly good impression on someone, then yes, there is a chance that they will say to graduate recruitment, oh, because I think this did happen to me, actually, genuinely. I went to quite a few events and the same person happened to be there every time. And I built up quite a good relationship with that person. And, I think she did mention it to graduate recruitment, which helped, but it's not necessary. And actually that just was, I happened to build up a really good relationship with her. But it's not necessary by any means. I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that you need to panic if you don't know anyone at all. Like, honestly, most of the trainees that come through the process that I've seen do not know anyone at all.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. Shivani's asked about, she said, I wanted to ask about part-time GDL. What could you be doing that could make you stand out whilst being part-time, or is it enough? So do you mean, Shivani, what can you be doing at work or in an interview? Do you want to maybe pop your answer in there and then we'll move to another one while you're answering that, because it's not, I think just,
I think we could do the next question, couldn't we?
Yeah, we'll do the next question while Shivani just clarifies that. Okay, so do you have any advice about how to make your personality show through an application without sounding unprofessional? Oh, I quite like that, actually.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's difficult. It is difficult to kind of know where that line is between kind of being different and unique and it kind of drifting into sort of unprofessional. It's a good question. I mean, I think having something different about you, having different interests or having different skills is a good way to get your personality to shine through. I mean, there normally is a question on application form about kind of your extracurriculars or something that gives you a chance to kind of delve into a bit more of your personality, or if not, then in your cover letter, there will normally always be an opportunity where you can kind of cover these things that make you unique. And I think it's kind of about, I suppose it's about the content really of that more than the style, because you still want your style to remain professional throughout. So I would try not to get your personality through by kind of having this kind of like wild out there style. I would try and make it more about what you put in that box rather than how you write it, because you can kind of, you can sort of get into dangerous territory if you try and write it in a very kind of shocking way. I don't know, have you got any experiences where you kind of thought you read something?
With personality, I think that tends to come across in interview. I think you can be really, really nervous and rigid, and actually just try, and it's easy for me to say now because I used to get so nervous in interviews, and I know that this question is more around application, but I think the interview is really where you have that opportunity to show your personality. You actually are able to have, answer the questions in a way that feels natural to you. Don't try and be somebody else. Try and just be yourself and be authentic as possible, because they are interviewing you, not your mate who's got a job in another firm. So just don't, I don't know, it's a really difficult one. Just try and be as authentic as possible. And if you do have interests, like for example, one of my things is I'm really big on mental health. So if you've got those interests, then make it really clear that you're passionate about something and why you're passionate about it, because that will stand you. Everyone's going to answer the question just as is, whereas if you've got a passion, then talk about it.
Yeah, I think that authenticity point is really important as well. Like, most of my work at the time when I applied for my training contract, most of my work experience had actually come from working in Ibiza, which I'd worked for 4 years. I'd worked in Ibiza, and that was my main form of work experience, to be honest. My main paid work experience. I'd done a few legal placements by then, but basically my working environment had pretty much consisted of working in Ibiza, and that's what I ended up talking about. And the partner who was interviewing me, I think 70% of that interview ended up talking about that, which was great because I didn't want to talk about my A levels. So but it's kind of, I kind of thought this is really what I've spent most of my working life doing, in all honesty. So I'm not going to try and pretend I've kind of spent my life working in an office in a corporate environment. I haven't, but I'm going to take what I have done and show the transferable skills. So I think that's really important about not trying to pretend that you're somebody else or somebody that you think that they want you to be. It's about showing who you truly are, but making sure that you pull out the most relevant parts of your personality to a career in law, if you know what I mean, you know, without trying to say you've got traits that you don't, or, you know, because actually, you know, people want people who are different and they want to work with people who are fun to work with. You know, law is a team sport, really. And it's, you know, it's as much about people having the criteria, because a lot of people are going to have the criteria, you know, they get a lot of applications. It's about actually, is this somebody who we want to work with? Is this somebody who we can see working their way through the ranks and making it up to partner? And you kind of, and these days, thankfully, you kind of have to be a nice person to do that as well. You know, you have to be liked, you know, you can't just kind of get through the process by having no people skills and having no personality. So it's important, it is important to show that. And, you know, you're 100% right. Try and be as authentic as you possibly can be, because that is honestly what people want to see. They want to see the real you. They don't want to see a kind of fake corporate robot. And it is really obvious if you're trying to be that.
On the authenticity point, I think it's important as well, not just for what the employer wants to see, but actually so that you find the right firm. Because if you're trying to be something that you're not, applying to firms that don't really fit your values, then you'll end up in a job that you actually don't like. So you've just got to be really mindful that actually by being authentic, it doesn't just benefit the employer, it benefits you, because you find an employer that fits with your values. And I think that's really important, something that I learned the hard way along my
oh, I did as well. Some of my application forms that I've read, you know, I was trying to be some like corporate salesperson. It's just diabolical. Yeah.
Last question. So Shivani's just clarified what else can she be doing whilst doing the GDL part-time?
Yeah,
I kind of covered it a little bit with work experience and
work experience. Yeah, in terms of that, it doesn't have to be purely legal. I mean, you can take transferable skills from literally any other type of job. You know, there are so many skills that are useful in law, and you can take them from anything. So it's not absolutely vital for it to be legal work experience. It can be any kind of work experience. I also think doing charity work is really good as well, to spend time doing in your spare time, as well as paid work experience, because CSR is really important to a lot of law firms. I mean, I can say, you know, particularly with my firm, we're particularly keen because we work with loads and loads of charities. So having done some charity work is really important as well. You know, any other skills courses to kind of boost, you know, any other skill set that you think, you know, you could maybe, you know, even if it's public speaking, or if it's IT skills, or you know, learning a language, anything where you think you could kind of boost a relevant skill. There's lots of free courses that you can do, some free coding courses as well, just, you know, which, you know, is in the current climate is quite favorable to have skills in tech and IT. So anything, you know, any things like that which are a little bit different and, you know, are relevant to boost a relevant skill, you know, all of that is useful to do during your spare time during the GDL as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's difficult when you're studying as well, because you're trying to balance obviously getting that course completed to the highest standard, but equally still trying to obtain experience. But, you know, many people, even when they're doing a full-time course, will still go and get experience or do charity work and all of that side of it. I'd also say just check with the university. I know when I was doing the bar course, we could do things like street law, and they have like projects like pro bono law clinics, that type of thing. So just check with, if you're doing your GDL at a law school that does offer those types of things, you can get involved in doing some more practical stuff. Even though it might be through the university, it can still be really helpful to give you some practical skills. And I know a lot of law schools now have like free clinics and things where you can go in and do a little bit of advice. So even if it's just that type of thing where you just do it like once a month or something, it's better than doing nothing alongside it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look, we've massively run over, and thank you so much. So how can everybody stay connected, and where should they go for more information? Yeah.
Ta-da, ta-da.
Outside, that's it, perfect.
Yeah, this is my jazz hands up here. So yeah, well, then my TikTok isn't on there. You can keep updated on TikTok as well. I need to update my background because I haven't, which is at the TikTok lawyer. But so yeah, most of my info, I'm probably most active these days on Instagram and LinkedIn, but I am on YouTube as well. When I can upload content, which is usually about twice a month, but I'm active on Instagram and LinkedIn most days during legal content. So please connect with me there. Yeah, those are Twitter as well. Yeah, up there, all the platforms, you know, not Snapchat. But everything, I'm not down with the kids on Snapchat, but pretty much everything else you'll find me on. Yeah.
Chrissy's stuff is so. We connected earlier this year, but you know, the stuff that she's putting out there. She's so selfless with the amount of free stuff she gives away. And when you did all of the stuff around law fairs, you give loads of freebies. So, you know, if you're not connected with her already, then do connect with her, because she's really, really helpful in supporting people into a legal profession. So thank you so much.
Thank you. No doubt we'll catch up again soon, hopefully in real life at some point in the not too distant future, 2021 I expect. But
I'm planning for next summer, we're going to do cocktails somewhere.
Oh yes, we'll definitely do cocktails. Maybe when Lauren comes back from Barbados, we'll get Lauren in as well.
Living her best life as well. I'm stuck here.
I know. I was going to go there if Dubai didn't work out. I'm going to go live with Lauren, but luckily it's going well over here. So yeah.
Well, thank you ever so much, and good night, because it's bedtime for you.
It definitely is. Good bedtime, good night time for me. Yeah, but have a good evening, and I will speak to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks everyone who joined and for all your questions. See you guys soon.
See you later, guys. Bye.
Bye.